Warning: the following narrative contains extremely graphic and disturbing content that may be triggering to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The young woman, heavily pregnant, lay on the table, grimacing in pain. Above her stood Roch, wearing a red velvet robe and a thin golden crown. He then began choking the woman, before adorning himself with jewelry. He punched her in the stomach, and then sliced a 5-inch gash under her ribs. He reached inside her and calmly and sadistically pulled out a length of her intestines. The woman, void of any pain medication, screamed in pain. After crudely stitching her up, she was submerged into an ice-cold bath. His wife, his unborn child. By the following morning, the woman had passed away. Roch began making outlandish claims, proclaiming that his love could bring her back to life. He also proclaimed that he himself was pregnant with her reincarnated spirit, and ordered his followers to dig up her body. Once her body was exhumed, Roch instructed another wife to dismember her and pour vinegar over her remains to rid them of worms. He then had other members drill a hole into her skull, believing that he could make love to her decaying brain and produce her reincarnation through his output. Although he encouraged male members to participate, most of them had been castrated, which prevented them from doing so. Roch shared his bed with his wife's skull, making love to it often. Nevertheless, despite his endeavors, the inevitability of decay compelled him to cremate his wife's remains. He adorned himself with one of her ribs strung around his neck, reminiscent of Adam and Eve's tale. However, he couldn't relinquish her entirely, opting to conserve some of her bones and organs in jars immersed in olive oil, stored within his macabre trophy shed. This shed housed not only these macabre keepsakes, but also dozens of teeth, private parts of both men and women, and later, a fully amputated arm. This man, lacking official certification as a doctor or surgeon, operated as a delusional self-proclaimed healer within a wilderness cult. His beliefs encompassed polygamy, amputations, torture, punishment, and a fervent conviction in an impending apocalypse. And thus begins the story of the Ant Hill Kids cult. Welcome to another episode of Sofa, Mocha, and Mystery. Please be aware that this case contains graphic content and may be triggering. It covers sensitive topics, so if you are easily disturbed, we advise you to skip this episode. Roch Thériault was born on May 16, 1947 in Quebec, Canada. Most of Roch's childhood remains shrouded in mystery, with a scattered mix of claims regarding his upbringing. Some accounts suggest that he didn't walk until the age of 3 and didn't speak until much later, though the accuracy of these details is uncertain. However, once Roch did start speaking, it became evident that he possessed remarkable intelligence, albeit in a rather peculiar way. He was the type of child who would immerse himself in a particular subject and then seamlessly inject his newfound knowledge into casual conversations, often leaving others bewildered by the sudden shift in topic. His thirst for knowledge seemed more about showcasing his intellect rather than genuine curiosity. According to some who knew him during his childhood, Roch displayed a tendency towards arrogance and self-pity. He would exaggerate minor ailments into life-threatening conditions and frequently sought attention as a victim of circumstances. There were even instances where he falsely claimed to have terminal illnesses or boasted about possessing supernatural healing powers. Roch also alleged that his father was abusive, claiming incidents of being thrown downstairs and locked in the cellar when his father was angered. However, these claims have been disputed by some neighbors and family friends, who described Roch's parents as kind individuals who wouldn't engage in such behavior. Furthermore, there are conflicting accounts regarding Roch's family dynamics and upbringing. Some recall disturbing games orchestrated by his father, such as the game Bone, where family members would kick each other under the table with metal-toed boots until they surrendered. However, others deny the existence of such activities, painting a contrasting picture of a relatively normal family environment. Despite dropping out of school in the 7th grade, Roch spent much of his time studying the Bible, a task he disliked due to his father's involvement in a conservative Catholic movement. This movement advocated for the pervasive influence of Catholic teachings in all aspects of life, a concept that Roch found suffocating. As Roch entered adolescence, he began to exude a magnetic charisma, characterized by intense blue eyes and a captivating presence. He possessed a subtle yet potent allure that drew people towards him, leaving them entranced by his confidence and charm. Some described his gaze as hypnotic, capable of making individuals feel as though they were the center of the universe in his presence. He possessed the commanding presence that instantly drew attention when he entered a room, embodying the essence of a natural-born entertainer. People praise him for his charisma and wit, with the author of Savage Messiah describing him as a prankster and natural showman who could effortlessly captivate an audience. By the age of 21, Roch had embarked on a journey of self-discovery, distancing himself from his family's beliefs and exploring various Christian denominations. He married his first wife, 17-year-old Francine Grenier, and for a brief period, they enjoyed a semblance of normalcy, renting a small apartment in Montreal and welcoming 2 sons, Roch Jr. and Francois. However, their domestic tranquility was shattered when Roch began experiencing severe stomach pain. Despite undergoing multiple surgeries, his condition worsened, and he was diagnosed with dumping syndrome, an uncommon condition characterized by rapid food transit through the digestive system, leading to symptoms like vomiting and diarrhea. Roch's ordeal sparked a fascination with medicine and surgery. He immersed himself in studying human anatomy, but his personality underwent a drastic transformation. Once a conservative man, he became temperamental, argumentative, and dismissive of religion. He pressured Francine to adopt a more provocative wardrobe, signaling a departure from his previously held beliefs. Roch's downward spiral continued as he embarked on supposed business trips, which turned out to be covers for extramarital affairs. These infidelities shattered the trust within his marriage and marked the beginning of a tumultuous period in Roch's life. During a family gathering, Roch shocked Francine's conservative parents by suggesting starting a nudist colony on their land. Despite their incredulity, Roch persisted in his newfound obsession with anatomy, sex, and drinking. He began going on business trips ostensibly to sell his wood trinkets, but returned with no money, energy, and a diminished sex drive due to his affairs with other women, notably Giselle Guittard. Giselle would become his first follower, and hailed from a troubled family background, where her father conditioned her to be unlike her mother, who didn't meet his stringent standards of devotion. Consequently, Giselle experienced a series of toxic relationships, with Roch being the most damaging. Their encounters, despite Roch's marriage, consisted of him professing love and fabricating stories to manipulate Giselle into leaving her life behind. Shortly after meeting, Giselle ended her current relationship, and Roch parted ways with his wife, Francine, and 2 children without hesitation. In Rockford, Quebec, Roch became fixated on religion, immersing himself in the Bible and condemning the Catholic Church. He focused on passages from the Old Testament advocating women's submission to men, forming his own religion around these beliefs, disregarding teachings about respect for others. Initially lacking a church or followers, Roch's interest peaked when Seventh-day Adventist preacher Pierre Zita arrived in town. Intrigued by the Seventh-day Adventist denomination's contrasting principles to Catholicism, Roch saw potential for his own agenda. The Seventh-day Adventist denomination, a Protestant denomination, stressed simple living with strict regulations, appealing to Roch's cult-building ambitions. They observed the Sabbath on Saturday, emphasized Jesus' imminent return, and upheld the Bible as their sole authority. Many adhered to healthy lifestyle practices like vegetarianism and kosher dietary laws from Leviticus, abstaining from alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. Roch was drawn to their apocalyptic beliefs, envisioning himself among the blessed while relishing the thought of his Catholic family facing damnation. This ideology aligned with his narcissistic tendencies, fueling his aspirations for superiority and control. This suited Roch perfectly, as the local preacher started his church in their hometown, gathering a congregation of just 6 people, a rather pitiful turnout. Nevertheless, he preached fervently, renting hotel rooms week after week. Roch relished these sessions, enjoying the attention of the small group. He found solace in venting about his ex-wife and discussing his problems and ailments, captivating the room with his charisma. This charisma set him apart from other cult leaders. He also began selling Seventh-day Adventist books on behalf of the church and quickly became one of their top salesmen. His girlfriend, Giselle, embraced the faith and joined him in selling books, forming a formidable team. Roch was even entrusted with heading the therapeutic division of the church, teaching people how to quit smoking in just 5 days. A role that, though small, ignited his thirst for power and control. While Roch focused on aiding smokers, other church members busied themselves with recruiting new, young members to the Seventh-day Adventist faith. Among Roch's most dedicated disciples were individuals from abusive backgrounds, a common pattern among those who seek solace in cults, craving guidance from authoritative figures. One such disciple was Solange Boyard, raised by an alcoholic parent. She became one of Roch's most devoted followers, a loyalty that would later lead to her tragic demise, a story we'll delve into further as the story continues. Roch swiftly assumed control over the fresh recruits, predominantly comprised of teenagers and young adults, steering them towards becoming devout Seventh-day Adventist members. His teachings revolved around wholesome living, forgiveness, and embracing God in their daily lives, a seemingly uplifting message. However, his underlying objective was to seclude them from society, a common tactic employed by cult leaders to erode individual autonomy and critical thinking. Regrettably, these individuals abandoned their previous lives to reside in Roch and Giselle's apartment, finding Roch endlessly captivating day and night. Roch encouraged his followers to address him as Pappy and Giselle as Mommy, establishing a dynamic where he held the role of leader while Giselle was regarded as the First Lady. The shift to living with Roch and Giselle marked the onset of a turbulent phase. Giselle found herself grappling with a challenging dynamic, sharing their cramped living quarters with 8 other people. The atmosphere grew increasingly uncomfortable with the introduction of massage parties, a concept Giselle found unsettling. Moreover, witnessing 6 other women becoming enamored with Roch added to her distress. Despite her reservations, Roch coerced Giselle into compliance, leveraging guilt to persuade her that welcoming strangers into their home was a test of her love for him and God. Reluctantly, Giselle acquiesced, and Roch continued to expand his following. The majority of Roch's followers were in their late teens to early 20s, while Roch himself was in his mid-30s. Originally intending to resume their education after the summer, these individuals found themselves ensnared in Roch's influence, intoxicated by the attention he bestowed upon them, leading them to forsake their educational aspirations. As summer drew to a close, Roch was steadfast in isolating his followers further and molding them to adhere to his ideologies. Despite mounting concerns from their families, Roch's charisma posed a formidable barrier, hindering their attempts to break free from his sway. By the summer of 1978, Roch had amassed a considerable following, many of whom were contemplating returning to school. Exploiting the beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, Roch emphasized the imminent second coming of Christ, portraying education as inconsequential in comparison. Roch further impressed the members of his local Seventh-day Adventist church, and he quickly rose to a position of influence, teaching others about the church's teachings. However, his lessons took a dark turn, advocating for male dominance, subservience of women, and polygamy. This conflicted with the beliefs of the church's leadership, leading to his expulsion. Undeterred, Roch took a group of young followers with him, leveraging his charisma and multilingual abilities to win them over. Despite Roch's initial charm and apparent passion, his teachings became increasingly radical and misogynistic, alienating him from the mainstream Seventh-day Adventist community. However, his ability to captivate and persuade others remained intact, attracting a devoted following. As their group of followers grew, they decided to open a business called the Healthy Living Clinic. The clinic offered a 5-day program focused on organic food, alternative medicine, and group therapy sessions. Despite the clinic's positive reputation in the local community, funded by donations and the sacrifice of its members, the true cost became apparent as members sold their homes, cars, and even gave up custody of their children to support the clinic financially. One day, a visibly distraught man walked into the clinic, tears streaming down his face. He explained to the staff that his wife, Geraldine, aged only 38, had been diagnosed with leukemia. Despite receiving treatment at a hospital, he felt desperate and needed to explore every avenue to help her. Upon hearing the man's plea, Roch took charge of the situation with authority and motivation. His confidence in Geraldine's recovery was unwavering, in stark contrast to the doctor's cautious approach at the hospital. While medical professionals emphasized the uncertainty of Geraldine's prognosis and the limitations of treatment, Roch's reassuring demeanor offered a glimmer of hope. Roch suggested visiting Geraldine at the hospital himself to see if there was any additional support he could offer. However, upon entering her hospital room, he reacted with disgust, detecting an unpleasant odor. Immediately, Roch became enraged, accusing the medical staff of prioritizing profits over Geraldine's well-being and condemning their treatment methods as malpractice. It's important to note that Roch lacked any medical certifications or qualifications to support his claims or actions. Despite this, his charismatic personality and confident demeanor often overshadowed his lack of expertise, leading others to place unwarranted trust in his judgment. Brazily tossing out random medical jargon, Roch managed to convince Geraldine's husband that the hospital was doing more harm than good. Encouraging the man to take his wife out of the hospital, Roch asserted that he cared more about Geraldine's well-being than anyone else. The husband, moved by Roch's persuasive words, withdrew Geraldine from the hospital and entrusted her care to the clinic. From that day forward, Roch strictly controlled access to Geraldine, forbidding anyone other than her husband from visiting her. He implemented a treatment plan consisting solely of organic food and grape juice, completely eschewing conventional medical intervention. Tragically, without proper medical treatment, Geraldine's condition deteriorated rapidly, and she soon passed away. However, Roch didn't view her death as a failure, but rather as a testament to his purported ability to perform miracles. He claimed to have brought her back from the brink of death by kissing her on the forehead, only to let her go at God's behest, further solidifying his mystique as a healer with divine powers. Despite failing to save Geraldine's life, Roch's ability to convince others of his supposed abilities remained unshaken, illustrating the profound impact of his manipulative tactics on vulnerable individuals. The group therapy sessions, which were mainly led by Roch, were ineffective and served as opportunities for him to understand the weaknesses and insecurities of the members. Despite their questionable practices, the clinic began advertising itself as a place for healing various illnesses, including terminal cancer, even though they had previously failed to save Geraldine. As their situation grew increasingly dire, with debt collectors hounding them and their supply of food and literature from the church cut off, Roch made a drastic decision. He decided to flee with his followers, including Giselle, to escape their mounting problems. At this point, their group consisted of 12 women, 6 men, and 2 children. Roch convinced the group to go off the grid, citing a vision he claimed to have had during a meditative stroll in the woods. According to him, he saw a white light and heard a voice warning him about the impending apocalypse. He claimed they had 6 months until Christ's return and the apocalypse would occur, using this as justification for their move off the grid. 3 days after his vision, Roch led his followers on foot to their new isolated sanctuary, which he aptly named Eternal Mountain. Located a 4-hour walk from any civilization, this sanctuary served as their secluded compound. However, Roch's claims of suffering from cancer and abdominal pain conveniently exempted him from much of the physical labor involved in building their community. Despite being in the middle of the woods with no nearby grocery stores or hunting expertise, they began constructing their compound from scratch. Starting at 5 a.m. every day, they labored to cut down trees, haul rocks, and construct buildings. Roch's authoritarian control extended to their daily routines, as he enforced strict work schedules and deprived them of adequate food and sleep. Disobedience was met with even harsher punishments, such as further reducing rations. Additionally, Roch would recite sermons throughout the night, depriving them of sleep and making them more suggestible to his manipulations. As part of stripping them of their individual identities, Roch renamed each follower with names from the Old Testament, reserving the grand title of Moses for himself. With a surplus of women compared to men, Giselle, Roch's wife, voiced concerns about the imbalance to Roch. However, he manipulatively turned the situation around, citing scriptures from the Old Testament to justify his authority to sleep with all the women in the cult. Blaming Giselle for the idea, Roch convinced his followers to comply, further solidifying his control over them. During this time, the tragic events of November 18, 1978, known as the Jonestown mass suicide led by cult leader Jim Jones in Guyana, sent shockwaves globally. This incident sparked widespread fear and suspicion of cults among both civilians and authorities, particularly in the United States. Rumors began to circulate about a large Frenchman and his followers gathering at a place called Eternal Mountain in the woods of Quebec, Canada. Authorities responded by subjecting everyone in the cult to psychiatric evaluations. However, to their surprise, all members passed the evaluations, claiming they were of sound mind and had joined the cult willingly. Even Roch underwent testing, passing despite indications of schizophrenic tendencies. Most of the women were in agreement with the polygamy. However, the few who were against it were too afraid to voice their opinion. Enamored with Roch, jealousy quickly brewed among the women in the cult. All sharing the same man, they began writing love letters to Roch, competing for his affection. One of them wrote, "My beloved, my heart is intertwined with yours, and I find solace in your presence. I am grateful for the family you have created and included me in. Thank you for the promise of better days. I feel complete by your side, and I am devoted to living simply but fully. Please forgive me for my shortcomings. I love you, Pappy." Enjoying the devoted attention from his female followers, Roch began to feel disillusioned with following the Seventh-day Adventist scripture. He felt it lacked purpose, and he grew tired of adhering to its rules. He decided to abandon vegetarianism and indulge in pleasures like Pepsi, alcohol, and cognac, along with comfort foods like potato chips and fries. This shift in behavior would ultimately lead him down a path of violent and sadistic behavior. Roch had a tendency to rant about himself during sermons, and if anyone dared to fall asleep due to exhaustion, he would violently shake them awake or beat them with a wooden club. A cult member, Jacques, was one of Roch's most devout followers. His wife, Maurice, had dutifully followed him to the commune and was heavily pregnant during the following event. Maurice, starving, entered the kitchen to find only a meager stack of pancakes, barely sufficient for one person. As she ate, Roch approached and struck her forcefully in the side, breaking 2 of her ribs. Maurice collapsed in agony while Roch callously observed, withholding food as he deemed her deserving of punishment. Frustrated and in pain, Maurice pleaded with her husband, Jacques, stating that they must leave as she couldn't endure this any longer. Jacques conveyed Maurice's plea to Roch, who saw an opportunity for further punishment. He demanded they be brought before him immediately. Confronted by Roch, Jacques was given an axe and instructed to discipline Maurice since she was his wife. Though visibly hesitant, Jacques eventually complied, though his demeanor seemed strained in Roch's presence. Overwhelmed, Jacques broke down in tears as Roch issued a chilling ultimatum. Either Jacques cuts off one of Maurice's toes, or Roch would take all 10. Feeling trapped, Jacques had no choice. Aware of the futility of escape, Maurice submitted. Pregnant and isolated in the wilderness, she understood the dire consequences of fleeing. So she lay still as her own husband, Jacques, carried out the cruel punishment, severing her pinky toe. Roch then implemented a new rule: no communication without his presence. All commune members were forbidden from interacting unless Roch was present. To further cement the hierarchy and rankings, Roch orchestrated his own twisted rendition of the Olympics in the woods. These events resembled gladiator-level games, where physical and psychological torture served as entertainment. Roch embraced the role of a sadist, delighting in pitting people against each other and playing with their minds. He derived pleasure from devising unique methods to torment his followers, often displaying creativity in his approaches. One of his depraved games involved drawing a large square in the dirt, where he compelled his naked followers to wrestle inside, creating a Fight Club-esque atmosphere for his own satisfaction. He would impose timed intervals for them to engage in combat or instruct the group to gang up on a single individual. Sometimes, he forced members to strip naked and endure hours in the snow, or he distributed knives to everyone except one person, falsely claiming they would be hunted and stabbed, only revealing the deception at the last moment. Roch's sadism extended to humiliation as well. He'd humiliate his followers by dousing them with boiling water and making them sit on hot stoves. He'd also subject them to eating each other's feces and dead mice, or force them to act as human toilet paper. He'd even pull out their teeth with pliers or make them engage in group adult activities, sometimes involving all the offspring. There are even claims that he coerced members into engaging in bestiality and marrying each other with excrement. Despite the horrific nature of these acts, Roch would manipulate his followers into believing that he didn't want to do these things, but he was merely a vessel for God's will. After these brutal sessions, he would dramatically fall to his knees outside the cabin, crying out to God to stop using him as a vessel. The group, feeling sympathy for him, believed that enduring such torture was a purification process, cleansing them of sin to prove themselves worthy to God. In a letter to Roch after one particularly brutal night, a follower named Solange expressed her belief that his actions were not his own but were influenced by a higher power. She attributed his violent outbursts to being possessed by a powerful spirit, reaffirming her unwavering loyalty to him and to the master of life, God. As Roch continued with his twisted games of torture, some of his cruelest acts were inflicted upon the children of the cult. The children were often made to sleep in separate areas to their mothers, and were treated like animals, with infants often being sent to sleep in sheds. Roch, having a particular disdain towards Maurice, whose toe he had made her husband, Jacques, previously cut off with an axe, was forced to roll her 6-month-old baby, who was crying uncontrollably, naked, through the snow until he turned blue. When February 17, 1979 came around, the day Jesus was supposed to return according to Roch's predictions, and Jesus didn't show up, Roch explained it away by claiming that time works differently in heaven. He asserted that in heaven, one day is equivalent to 40 years on earth. This explanation kept the cult members believing that Jesus would eventually return. Despite the failed prophecy, Roch was still viewed positively by the public, as seen in the positive feedback received in Quebec City, where the headline of a newspaper read, "Free to live if they wish," portraying Roch as an awesome, rugged, Canadian free spirit. Despite the positive perception of Roch and his cult by some individuals, authorities began to pay attention again, prompting them to undergo psychiatric evaluations. However, Roch manipulated the situation by calling the press and portraying himself as a victim of the psychiatric system, resulting in public sympathy and pressure on the authorities to release him from the mental institution. This manipulation allowed Roch to escape accountability, but it also set the stage for tragic events within the cult, as the lack of proper investigation and intervention enabled Roch's harmful behavior to continue unchecked, eventually leading to fatalities. After some years, Roch convinced his first wife, Francine, with which he had 2 children, to visit the commune with them. At this stage, the commune received good favor from many of the public, despite the atrocities which were happening within. Despite knowing Roch's true nature, Francine would return. One night, during one of these visits, Roch showcased his supposed feats of strength on stage, which included bending 12-inch nails into shapes. While everyone in the cult applauded and sang his praises, Francine, aware of his foolishness, couldn't help but burst into laughter. However, this laughter proved to be a tragic mistake, as Roch immediately stopped what he was doing and violently attacked Francine in front of everyone. Despite Francine's screams for help, none of the cult members intervened or said anything, showing their complicity in Roch's violence. This incident left Francine shaken, and she never returned to the commune afterward. From this point on, the violence and darkness within the cult continued to escalate to new levels. The newest person to join the cult after they moved into the mountains was a man named Guy Vere. Guy had a history of depression and mental health problems, and he sought out the group after seeing Roch on TV talking about his prophecies. Intrigued by Guy's arrival from the woods, Roch subjected him to various tests to determine his worthiness to join. While Guy passed, Roch made it clear to the group that Guy was not their equal. Despite being allowed to join, Guy was relegated to living in the storage shed, excluded from celebrations, and given only minimal rations of food. Additionally, he was tasked with caring for the children referred to as the animals. Roch harbored a deep disdain for these children, viewing them as burdens and claiming they were controlled by the devil. He would often physically abuse them, asserting that he needed to beat the devil out of them. Therefore, he appointed Guy as their caretaker not because he deemed him suitable for the role, but rather because he believed Guy seemed mentally unstable. This decision reflected Roch's twisted logic and cruel treatment of those he considered lesser. On March 23, 1980, Roch orchestrated a celebration. His 2 sons from his marriage to Francine Grenier, Roch Jr., 12, and Francois, 10, were joining their father in the commune. Each time they were sent back to Francine from visiting Roch, she observed signs of malnourishment, abuse, and uncontrollable behavior. Unable to endure it any longer, she consented to them officially residing with Roch permanently. Roch was overjoyed at the prospect of having his sons with him indefinitely. He even provided them with special tunics, raising their status in the hierarchy above all others. During the celebration, everyone except Guy partook in the festivities. Guy, assigned to supervise the children referred to as the animals, was excluded and had to remain in the storage cabin with them. There are 2 versions of what happened that night. According to one version, while everyone was at the party, the son of Giselle and Jacques, 2-year-old Samuel began crying, disturbing Guy's sleep. In a fit of anger, Guy started screaming at Samuel, which only made him cry harder. This resulted in Guy punching Samuel 4 to 5 times in the face. The next day, when Roch and others discovered Samuel's injuries, They attempted to treat him, but sadly, Samuel passed away despite their efforts. In the second version of events, recounted by Giselle in the book Savage Messiah, Samuel's face bore bruises and signs of being beaten the next morning, but otherwise, he seemed fine. Bizarrely, Roch announced that Samuel needed to be circumcised. He proceeded to administer rubbing alcohol on a cotton swab, which he then forced into Samuel's mouth as a sedative. Without any painkillers, Samuel endured excruciating pain during the procedure, ultimately succumbing to alcohol poisoning from the swab in his mouth. This tragic end came after 2 years of suffering, marked by misery, neglect, and hunger. When Maurice and Jacques learned of their son's death, they briefly paused before returning to their tasks. It remains unclear whether their apparent detachment stemmed from a fear of provoking further punishment or from genuine emotional detachment. At dinner, Roch offered to assist in burning Samuel's body to prevent wild animals from scavenging it. Maurice and Jacques simply nodded in response, saying nothing more, and everyone else resumed normalcy as if nothing had happened. The community later held a trial to determine the outcome of Samuel's death. Guy took the stand to plead for his life, denying guilt in Samuel's murder. The jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guy was found not guilty by reason of insanity. This outcome shocked Roch, and he vocally expressed his disbelief, accusing the jury of being unable to see Guy's guilt. In a turn of events, Roch demanded castration as punishment for Guy. The jury, swayed by Roch's influence, reconvened to vote on the punishment. Remarkably, despite having previously found Guy not guilty due to insanity, 73 members of the community voted in favor of castration, fueled by Roch's urging. Roch persuaded Guy to undergo castration, portraying it as a transition to a higher status within the hierarchy. He portrayed eunuchhood as a unique position, slightly elevated from the bottom rank. According to Roch, eunuchs were often entrusted by rulers due to their lack of family ties and romantic interests, rendering them less likely to betray authority. Guy had also been suffering severe headaches for many years. Roch claimed that castration would cure him of his headaches. Reluctantly agreeing, Guy signed a document agreeing to the castration. Roch then directed him to lie down on the kitchen table, where Gabrielle prepared the tools for the operation: an elastic band, a razor blade, a magnifying glass, tweezers, and rubbing alcohol. With a crude slicing motion, Roch removed Guy's genitals. Guy endured saltwater compresses every 20 minutes to prevent infection. Remarkably, he never complained of headaches again. Roch's cruelty would not stop there. In the weeks following, he would often get completely drunk and tie Guy to a tree, beating him until he was black and blue. He would instruct the other cult members to gather around as if to witness Guy's death, only to stop the beating and laugh, reveling in his power over his followers. Fortunately, after enduring months of abuse, Guy managed to sneak out of the compound and went to the authorities to report all the atrocities committed by Roch. For once, the authorities took action and stormed the compound, arresting Roch along with 3 members of the cult. The children were also removed from the compound. However, Roch received a shockingly lenient sentence of only 2 years in jail for killing a toddler, while the others received lesser sentences. Despite this, not a single member of the cult left during this time. They remained loyal, waiting for Roch's return. During his imprisonment, Roch managed to impregnate 3 cult members. Upon his release in February 1984, he moved to Ontario, Canada, as he was banned from returning to Quebec. There, he took the remaining cult members to a 200-acre lot east of the river, where even worse atrocities would be committed. Within the compound, Roch compelled his members to construct a 2-story house, a bakery, and a sugar shack for maple syrup production, By this time, Roch had 12 members and 13 children under his control, each assigned specific tasks within the compound, ranging from construction and baking to serving as Roch's personal hairdresser or masseurs. However, sustaining the compound proved challenging due to financial constraints and poor crop yields in the Burnt River area. Roch persuaded his followers to resort to shoplifting and panhandling for funds outside the compound. When these methods fell short, he decided to enter the fruit trade. He dispatched several members to the Niagara Peninsula, renowned for its abundant fruit harvests, with the objective of procuring hundreds of pounds of fruit for local sale. This endeavor proved fruitful, culminating in the establishment of a company dubbed the Ant Hill Kids. From this stage, things escalated even further within the compound of the cult. Roch often participated in orgies, primarily consensual, during which he would select 2 to 8 women to accompany him to his room for sexual activities. Those not chosen for intercourse were required to massage him instead. Following these encounters, he directed all the women to pleasure themselves while he observed. Moreover, he fostered jealousy among the women by marking a square on the floor and instructing them to disrobe. They would then engage in naked combat to determine the most favored woman in the compound. Points were awarded or deducted based on participants remaining within the square. On occasion, men were also compelled to stand in the square, though they were prohibited from striking the women, often resulting in their own physical retribution. Roch's cruelty extended beyond these activities. He frequently subjected his followers to unprovoked beatings, sometimes employing the flat side of an axe or a club. Additionally, he performed circumcisions on certain members. One particularly sadistic practice involved stripping members naked and urinating on them, compelling them to open their mouths as well. Roch's depravity extended to the children of the cult. He would often force the children to join in the orgies, and if not join, watch. He would force the children to masturbate in front of him and the group, proclaiming it to be sexual education. If the children tried to refuse or retaliate, Roch would punish them severely. Forms of punishment included throwing them against trees, throwing them into freezing lakes, crushing their fingers and even nailing them to trees by their clothes, crucifixion style, and force the other children and adults to stone them. His depravity knew no bounds, with him holding 2 infants above a blazing fire, their mothers screaming and pleading with him. Although he threatened to throw the infants into the flames, he never did. Roch successfully indoctrinated his followers into believing that leaving the cult would result in divine retribution from God. This created a terrifying cycle of brainwashing, leaving members feeling trapped and powerless to resist, even as the situation worsened. Marital, the only member married to another follower and the mother of the 2-year-old who perished from poisoning, eventually summoned the courage to flee the commune. Recognizing Marital as a potential threat due to her outspoken nature and ability to sway others, Roch permitted her departure. Marital then sought help from a social worker and authorities, revealing the atrocities occurring at Eternal Mountain. Fortunately, they intervened, removing the children from Roch and their mothers, and placing them in foster care. However, Roch showed no remorse for their removal, viewing it as a necessary sacrifice to maintain his delusional utopia. Despite compelling evidence, Roch managed to manipulate the assigned child psychologist, convincing them of his innocence and earning praise for his alleged contributions to the community. Presenting himself as a victim of societal prejudice advocating for a return to a state of nature, Roch cunningly portrayed himself as innocent. Although the psychologist recommended returning the children to him, a competent judge intervened, leading to the children's permanent removal. However, this decision seemed to unleash an even darker and more violent side of Roch. With the children gone, he no longer felt the need to conceal his cruelty. and the atrocities escalated further. With the children gone, the behavior of the ant-hill kids deteriorated into a cycle of orgies and violence, and Roch grew even more dangerously unstable as time went on. He burned the skin off several cult members with a welding torch and struck one of his pregnant wives so hard in the stomach that she suffered a miscarriage. He would often use pliers to yank out the teeth of his followers on a whim, and he would also stab and shoot them as if they were his playthings. In one instance, he even forced a member to eat human feces and a dead mouse. After committing these acts, Roch would collapse onto his knees and beg for forgiveness from God, blaming the divine for making him commit these atrocities against his followers. By 1988, the physical toll of their lifestyle, characterized by lack of nutrition and constant violence, began to show in the poor health of Roch's followers. Despite suffering from stomach pain himself due to previous surgeries, Roch showed no sympathy, even to his favorites like Solange. Solange, in particular, expressed her suffering from stomach pain, but Roch showed her no care. Instead, he subjected her to what could be considered the worst atrocity. He performed a makeshift operation on Solange, giving her an enema consisting of molasses, oil, and water, before cutting open her stomach and ripping out her intestines with his bare hands, flooding the abdominal cavity with digestive acids. The cult members watched in complete fear, not daring to say a word as Solange screamed and writhed in pain. Roch then forced a couple of other cult members to crudely stitch her up while she was still alive, leaving her on the floor of the building to suffer until she eventually died. Even after her death and burial, Roch became even more deranged, convinced that he could raise Solange from the dead. He forced his disciples to dig up her body, cut open her skull, and join him in ejaculating into her decaying brain. He then cut out some of her ribs to make into a necklace, believing that one day he would impregnate her by biblical means, like Adam. Ever since Gabrielle joined the group, she had been a target of Roch's cruelty. On July 29, 1989, Roch perpetrated an act of torture that would ultimately lead to his downfall. When Gabrielle complained about a stiff finger, Roch responded by using a hunting knife to strip the skin off her right hand, pinning it to the kitchen table. He callously left her there for hours, enduring excruciating pain and severe bleeding. Determined to avoid losing consciousness, Gabrielle suffered in agony, fearing she would suffer a fate similar to Solange if she passed out. Roch only released her by severing her arm between her shoulder and elbow using a box cutter. Despite the severe injury, Gabrielle miraculously survived the ordeal, escaped, and sought refuge at a women's shelter shortly after losing her arm. However, a fellow cult member visited her at the shelter and persuaded her to return, despite having himself endured Roch's horrific act of cutting off the tip of his penis. This incident highlighted the extent of brainwashing within the cult. Gabrielle returned, and a few days later, in August 1989, Roch instructed his followers to heat a drive shaft with a torch and apply it to the stump of her arm. 3 days later, Gabrielle managed to escape again to the same women's shelter and sought medical assistance at a hospital. Although questioned by the police in the hospital, Gabrielle maintained her fabricated story that Roch was not involved in her injuries, claiming they were sustained in a car accident. However, the inconsistencies in her account aroused suspicion. On August 9, authorities returned to the compound to arrest Roch, only to discover that everyone in the cult had vanished. Gabrielle's testimony served as a turning point for numerous followers of Roch, emboldening them to escape alongside her, aided by loyal members Chantal and Jacques. They eluded capture for a full 2 weeks, seeking refuge in a makeshift camouflage shed within and around the compound. Eventually, Giselle, Roch's second wife, came forward to authorities with information about Solange's death, leading to Roch's murder trial. On January 18, 1993, Roch received a 10-year prison sentence for second-degree murder, with the possibility of parole for good conduct. This outcome exposes shortcomings within the Canadian judicial system. While many of Roch's followers slipped into obscurity, some chose to document their harrowing experiences in memoirs. While incarcerated, some of his followers remained steadfastly loyal, even bearing him children. Among them were his two eldest sons, offspring of Francine, who remained devoted to him. Despite Roch's attempts to charm both his followers and prison psychiatrists, he failed to win the favor of his fellow inmates. In April 1993, he was transferred to Kingston Penitentiary for his own safety. However, on February 23, 2011, at the age of 63, another inmate named Gerard MacDonald fatally stabbed Roch with a shiv. MacDonald then surrendered the weapon to the guards, marking the end of Roch's reign of terror. This brings our unsettling narrative to a close. If you found this account engaging, please consider subscribing, liking and sharing it. We would love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments below.